and the major Wall Street banks are making a ton of money from it. This system is almost entirely unregulated, and it is totally dominated by the big international banks.
The problem with the derivatives market is that it is largely based upon things that one cannot see. The over-the-counter trading in the derivatives markets is largely unregulated. Now, in 2010, after the crash, Congress passed the so-called Frank-Dodd Act, which was ostensibly designed to place more regulations on these derivatives markets and these exotic financial instruments. However, it really hasn't fundamentally enhanced the stability of the economies in the United States or in Europe. A good example of this, of course, is the still high unemployment rate, the still very, very shaky consumer confidence. So these two elements would be key in any type of real financial recovery.
The full legalization and rehabilitation of derivatives only occurred in the year 2000. And from there, it's a straight march, right, 5 or 6 years, to this huge financial cataclysm, which is the world derivatives panic and banking panic of 2007, 2008, 2009. Compare it to 1987. In 1987, we had exchange-traded derivatives, but not over-the-counter. So it was kept within bounds, although that had far-reaching consequences. If you look at the dot-com bubble of 2000, 2001, you'll see that that got quite serious too, but it didn't turn into a world depression. It was only when you had the real estate bubble and then the securitization of the real estate mortgages in subprime made into derivatives, made into collateralized debt obligations with credit default swaps piled on top of those, and some of them incorporated into structured investment vehicles, that you got this critical mass which has blown up the US and British banking systems and pitched the world into this depression.
Today, the notional value of all the derivatives held by Bank of America comes to approximately $75 trillion. JP Morgan Chase is holding derivatives with a notional value of about $79 trillion. It is hard to even conceive of such figures. Right now, the banks with the most exposure to derivatives are JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and HSBC Bank USA. Morgan Stanley also has tremendous exposure to derivatives. These are some of the major too big to fail, too big to jail banks. The biggest U.S. banks continue to grow, and they continue to get even more power. Back in 2002, the top 10 U.S. banks controlled some 55% of all U.S. banking assets. Today, the top 10 U.S. banks control well over 80% of all U.S. banking assets.
When they repealed Glass-Steagall Act in the United States, the banks have gone wild since then. And there's no regulation, there's no oversight, there's nothing to stop the financial follies of these banks who continue to make billions of dollars.
All the unemployment in the world today, right, it's in the hundreds of millions. 30 million real unemployed in the United States, 40 or 45 million unemployed in the European Union. All of that is directly related to this derivatives bubble, which blew out essentially the economic, the financial system of the world.
Over the past couple of decades, the derivatives market has multiplied in size. Everything is going to be fine as long as the system stays in balance. But once it gets out of balance, we could witness a string of financial crashes that no government on earth will be able to fix.
All it takes is for a series of cascading events for any one of these derivative instruments to go bad, and the whole house of cards could come down and paralyze the global economy. Now, really, these banks are the too big to fail banks, and these banks have become a threat to national security in the United States. As well as to the entire global security as well.
Far from being some arcane or marginal activity, financial derivatives have come to represent the principal business of the financier oligarchy in Wall Street, the City of London, Frankfurt, and other money centers. A concerted effort has been made by the politicians and the news media to hide and camouflage the central role played by the derivative speculation in the economic disasters of recent years. Journalists and public relations types have done everything possible to avoid even mentioning the word derivatives. coining phrases like toxic assets, exotic instruments, and most notably, troubled assets, as in Troubled Assets Relief Program or TARP. Most people do not realize this, but derivatives were at the center of the financial crisis of 2008. They will almost certainly be at the center of the next financial crisis as well.
There's going to be another financial catastrophe that's looming here, and when that happens, it's the greatest threat to national security that the U.S. has, and it's probably the greatest threat to global security. Because when these financial markets finally collapse, and they will, because the Federal Reserve has done some unauthorized, or what I consider to be illegal acts to prop up European banks to support the euro dollar, or the euro as a currency, when these things collapse, it's going to be economic pandemonium for everyone in the world, and we're going to see shortages, we're going to see famine, we're going to see the entire system of commerce globally may shut down. And this is really distressing.
What exactly is the difference between the Wall Street casino and other casinos, namely Vegas, let's say? Well, in Vegas, it's those who take part. It's the gamblers who might win or lose. Whereas in Wall Street, everyone is impacted. And everything, all prices. Long time since Thomas Aquinas' just price centuries ago. Today, everything from gasoline to rice to bread to your house to your car. Everything is gambled. Trillions and trillions of dollars in mortgage-backed securities, derivatives, options, just name it. All sorts of financial innovations. And that's what's setting the price. That's why when you gas up the car, what you're paying is not the real just price.
You mentioned things like oil, gasoline, food, rice, and so forth. Now we're talking about commodities markets, and they have special problems. But the derivatives, once again, are at the center of everything. I would recommend that we look at, for example, the London ICE exchange. And what we find here is that the gasoline price, for example, worldwide, is totally determined by speculation. It is not determined by supply and demand. We saw in 2008, the oil price reached $150 a barrel, approximately. Then when Wall Street blew out with Lehman Brothers in September of 2008, it went all the way down to $35. This is not based on economic fundamentals. It's purely speculative. And what happened in 2008 was that the bankrupt banks had to sell assets in order to avoid bankruptcy, and that's what brought down the price of oil. Then when they got down to $35 a barrel, they looked around and they wanted to see if Obama would do anything to regulate derivatives. They found that he would not, and then it went right back up again, and we're back up to 140 or 150 or at various times since then.
All of these issues, everything that anyone in the world uses, touches, consumes in any way, is backed by some, or has some derivative attached to it.
The trick here is something called energy derivatives, right? This is one version of derivatives, and in particular, I would call your attention to commodity index swap.